Hello class, this is Scott Caruso from MPX1312 here with my Week 3 Heuristics evaluation. We're going to talk about the games Wordly and World Series Poker today. And we've got 10 minutes to do it, so let's hop right to it. The first game I'm going to review is a game called Wordly. As it sounds, it's a word game, like kind of casual word, similar to Words with Friends, but on a much different scale. I reviewed it for the Android Galaxy 2, but it's available on a multitude of different devices, including iOS as well, not just Android. First of all, let's talk about some of the things that the game does really well. It handles interruptions just fine. It's an asynchronous style of multiplayer game, so you're able to pick up progress with no issues. Getting calls or texts or wanting to go do something else and multitask is not a big deal because you're not expected to do anything in real time. Also, the game contrast is nice and bright, so I had no issues playing indoors or outdoors, both day and night. No issues whatsoever in terms of game contrast. So in those two regards, there was a lot of success in terms of mobility. As it relates to some of the more multiplayer-centric heuristics, the game supports communication. There's in-game chat, and though there's no voice communication, I think it would be out of place in a game like this, which is really best served in very small, bite-sized chunks. Voice chat or something like that would feel out of place in a game like this. So I think the level of communication that you're provided in-game instant messaging makes sense for this style of game. It's very easy to find other players in game instances. You can do it via Facebook or by randomly or directly entering a player's name. Those are just some examples of ways you can find users. Very easy to get into and out of matches. So those are some of the things that the game does really, really well. Now, in terms of some of the things that the game can improve upon, I personally ran into issues starting and stopping games quickly because of what looked like a bug, but it's a pretty big usability-related bug in that I stopped being able to communicate with Facebook at some point during my play session. I have no idea why. It was never explained to me what happened, and I was never able to troubleshoot it. And there was very poor error messaging around it, which made getting into a new match even more confusing. In fact, there wasn't even an error message when I tried to do the Facebook Connect. It just didn't work. I would strongly recommend improving error messaging in this regard and pointing the user to other options about getting into a game to make this part of the user experience much better for the user. Also, the game is not respecting silent settings that you've set on the device. So if your device is set to silent, the game itself will still continue to make noise. You actually need to go into the settings menu and turn the sounds off yourself, which is not intuitive, and the settings menu is difficult to find as well. So I feel like this is an area where the game could really improve. If the device is silenced, I think the user would probably expect that the game would be silenced as well. And if not, make it much easier to get to the settings menu for the user. It's kind of difficult to find, and it's really tiny on the main menu. Now moving back to multiplayer-related things again. It's not really, in terms of providing the user with reasons to communicate, this game doesn't really lend itself well to communication because it's a very head-to-head game that's, like I said, in very bite-sized chunks, asynchronously, potentially against Facebook friends, but also potentially against strangers. So I don't necessarily think that any changes to the core model need to be made because, again, it's a very simple game in terms of what kind of communication it should provide. But I do think maybe making it more clear to the user that in-game chat is an option just to promote in-game communication might help. But outside of that, I don't really have any suggestions on how to improve it. I don't think it needs to be improved, even though the game isn't really providing reasons for communication. The game doesn't support any kind of groups or communities in any meaningful way. Yes, it supports your Facebook friends list, so that inherently is a community of itself. But being able to mark a user as a favorite, for instance, might be a way to improve that in that regard. There's no way to block people who are being particularly abusive in chat, which could be seen as a problem and kind of a usability issue. So in terms of being able to minimize deviant behavior, the game does struggle in that regard. But there's no real good way to cheat in the game because of the nature of the game. So that type of deviant behavior is curbed simply by the nature of the game itself. And finally, though the game doesn't crash or malfunction or anything like that when you lose network capabilities, the user experience is also not ideal. It allows you to navigate the menus as if there were network still enabled, but it doesn't populate menus like you would expect it to populate them. It doesn't give you the dynamic data that you would expect it to give you. There's a small toast message that appears at the bottom of the screen telling you that networks is not enabled, but it's quick and it's not very noticeable. My own personal recommendation would be to restrict all progress within the game if there's no network connection detected, just to make it more clear to the user that that's why things aren't working the way that you would expect them to work. Overall, in terms of a total heuristic score in those two areas, the game scored at a 14, 6 for mobility and 8 for multiplayer. And though I think it sounds like I was being a little bit harsh on the game, mostly because of communication-related things, I feel like the game also does a lot of things really well in terms of being a mobile kind of experience, and a lot of that comes down to, like I said, the asynchronous nature of the gameplay, which will allow the user to pick up and play almost at his own pace, really. So that was Wordly. Let's go ahead and talk about World Series of Poker now. So World Series of Poker is exactly what it sounds like. It's a poker game based off the World Series of Poker Tour. Some of the things this game does right is there's no problems with settings and surroundings. If you tell, I reviewed this for the iPad, by the way. If you silence your device, it silences the game. If you turn sounds on and off in the menu, it turns them on and off. So it does exactly what you would expect it to do. It conforms the way you would expect it to do. The game also handles interruptions as well as it can. Again, poker is a multiplayer game, so you can't simply pause the in-game action, but it does force a user to fold, and give him, that's really the least destructive action to his in-game wallet, if he doesn't act fast enough because something else might have happened or distracted him. And also, no issues with the game contrast. It played well in all environments that I tried to play it in. Related to multiplayer issues, the game makes it really easy to get into and out of a match. There's a quick play option as well as options to select the type of game that you would like to play. I had no problem getting into a match and starting to play one very, very quickly. And also, the game does a really good job of hiding bad network effects. If it loses connection to the network, it immediately gives you a pop-up saying it's trying to reconnect and prevents any other progress from being made because, again, it's an online game, and the nature of it is that you can't play if you're not online. So instead of confusing a user, it gives them a very easy error messaging around what the network problem is. So now, some of the issues that I have with the game. In terms of starting and stopping game sessions quickly, getting into one is not a problem. It's getting out of one that is a problem. It requires 2 or 3 taps of the screen in order to get out of a game session, and it's kind of buried in an options menu, which made it very difficult for me to figure out how to actually get out of a match that I was currently in if I didn't want to play anymore. I would recommend providing a much simpler, more intuitive method of leaving the table, like maybe a single button or icon in the bottom toolbar to let you leave the table in a quick manner. The game does support communication, but it's not a primary focus of the game. In over 2 or 3 hours of gameplay, I didn't see a single player outside of myself use the chat features in the game. And part of the reason is because the chat screen, as you can see right here in the picture, is not very inviting. Maybe make the screen more inviting, make it more obvious that there's chat that can be had, and it's something that could improve the user experience, because right now it's just not. Maybe allowing the chat to persist across sessions so it can be more global, maybe that would help as well. But really just pointing out that chat exists and making it a more user-friendly experience would probably help. And for the same reason, there's not really any reasons to communicate. Again, poker is generally a pretty social game when played in person, but there's a little reason to communicate within the game, outside if you're playing with friends in the same match. So again, better calling out of the chat functions through on-screen hints might be helpful there. There's no clubs or communities or groups to speak of. The user can add friends, typically based on Facebook friends, but you can't create like a poker club or anything like that to easily compare winnings or accomplishments and things like that, which would be a really cool feature to have there. Deviant behavior isn't really minimized as well. I mean, it's a poker game, so people are going to always try to game the system a little bit. You can ignore users, I assume, who are chatting and being jerks, but there's no way to block them. There's no way to report users who are being verbally abusive or who are not playing within the spirit of the game because they're giving the max bet each time no matter what, things like that. So being able to report a user, I think, would be a big help as well. So overall, the game between the two categories scored a 12, 3 for mobility and 9 for multiplayer. It was a very straightforward poker experience. It functioned as you would expect it to function, but it was really missing a lot of those secondary features related to communication and other users that really push it over the top. And I think that's one of the reasons why it is not quite as highly rated as some of the other poker games that are out there on the market right now. So those are the 2 games I reviewed this week. Hope everyone else had a good week 3 as well, and I will see you again for week 4.